Damn it, everywhere you go there's weird shadows all over the place. No pun intended. Alright, dude. Morality. Morality keeps us boring. Now my favorite homie Terence McKenna says there's a very big difference between ideals and ideology. Ideals are these sort of general principles like be good to other people, do your best. Whereas ideology gives you a specific worldview followed by a therefore. Ideologies are always built on false premises and set up inaccurate dualities, the most notable of which is us and them. Cultures come out of ideologies, and cultures are similarly set up with us and them. Cultures are always against something, black people, gay people, rock music, until it decides to accept it. Ideologies are always lulling us into this view of duality, always lulling us into this us and them, good and bad, right and wrong. Because of this, morality itself is an indicator that an ideology is present. The goal is not to find the correct ideology. The goal is to transcend ideology altogether. The goal is to see beyond the blinders of our cultural conditioning and our ideology to feel who we really are, and to be able to bring in that wild, wondrous innovation and imagination that has been the only thing that has ever moved humanity forward. One of the best ways that we can get there, to a place beyond and beneath ideology and cultural conditioning, is to withhold our immediate judgments of good and bad, right and wrong. When you talk about getting rid of all these spring-loaded moralities that we have going on inside us, two really big issues come up. The first is, what about rape and murder? Let's just put that aside. Let's just say I'm not condoning rape and murder. That's still fucked up, and we can just put it over there for a second. Because normally, where these little spring-loaded moralities of good and bad, right and wrong come up are not in really obvious cases like rape and murder. Morality more often rears its ugly head in much more subtle ways than that, instilling stigma and shame for our most core desires, for sex, adventure, curiosity, and the basic decisions that people make to get by day to day, given the system that we find ourselves in. And even the fact that we just think if, like, all of a sudden we let go of the moral chains, the first thing that would happen would be rape and murder, shows an underlying assumption about who we are as people. Shows that we're walking around with an underlying assumption that we as human beings are fundamentally bad, and that our desires and instincts are fundamentally fucked up and violent. Which is an idea that's probably reinforced by issue number 2. Which is, what about those assholes that are raping and killing all the time? What about those guys that run Monsanto and BP and those fuckers that are allowed to go precisely because we do not have a way of enforcing a life-sustaining moral code? Now, I'm against those assholes as much as the next anarchist. But what I've seen is more often than not, morality is one of those forces of judgment that turns us against ourselves and our neighbors, much more than it does against the system. The same way that the PR spin on climate change asks us to make individual choices about what light bulbs we buy and shower duration instead of addressing the systemic issues at play. Like in California, 80% of the water is used by agriculture. That means that even if we cut all of our water use by 50 to 80%, it would barely make a dent in the reality of what's going on. Which means when you look in the bigger picture of social conditioning, it's those same assholes that are using social convention disguised as morality. Using this moral framework to distract us from what's going on and keep us focused on things like monogamy or financial responsibility, things that precisely turn us away from the most unethical behaviors being perpetrated. If you look at some commercials or sitcoms these days, they're still playing out this 1950 gender role archetype, like an ethnically flavored, rehashed version of the American dream middle-class milieu. But here it's black, and here it's Latino, and here it's Asian. Here's storyline after storyline about how be doing the right thing and being a good person and coming to your senses means coming back into the familial fold of sociocultural conditioning. And I know that there's so many other types of media out there, that TV is getting awesome, that commercials are getting postmodern and postmodern as fuck. But the fact that these images are still out there so strongly, selling us a vision of what life is supposed to be that's different than what we experience and making us feel wrong for it, is something to notice. So that really, when we talk about morality, all we're really talking about is someone who has successfully internalized the social doctrine. How can we fully dream under the knee-jerk reactions happening within and without of good, bad, right, wrong, acceptable, not acceptable? How can we be Willy Wonka or Picasso? Most of what passes as teaching morals is actually just social conditioning. How many times have you seen kids on the bus or in line at the store being slapped and scolded for things like twirling around in circles, for being a little bit loud? On buses, in supermarkets, in classrooms and friend groups, we are slapped and scolded and shamed for our basic instincts and following ourselves, to the point where I feel like we come to internalize it and feel like in a fundamental way we are bad and wrong. Now, the word neurotic has become sort of watered down by colloquial use, but Freud actually meant a very specific thing. He meant, for example, when you're a baby, you have all of these wants. You want, and what you want can't be given all the time. So the baby will press this desire down into their unconscious. But along with pressing this desire into this unconscious, the prohibition of that desire goes down with it. Desire and prohibition merge to create a dynamic energy unit that is then embedded in the subconscious. This is a built-in no that becomes woven into the psyche, that comes up within us as a conscience, but is actually the voice of society and socialization itself. But what's a baby to do, right? You want. If you want something that's not socially acceptable, you're going to find a substitute that is socially and morally acceptable. This dynamic energy unit of desire and prohibition are going inside the psyche, and if something's going inside, it means something's also going to be coming outside, so that this desire nature is going to be projected onto a substitute, both by the baby, by the individual themselves that's going to find a substitute desire, and by the caregivers around them. So if a baby is crying all the time because they want the boob, the caregivers are going to give it a pacifier. You are a man and you want gay sex, then you're going to substitute it onto wanting Jesus. Or, whatever. And that this is the state of neuroses, where you're using things that are socially acceptable to fulfill secret desires that are not socially and morally acceptable, which creates a sense of guilt because that dynamic energy unit within you associates desire with prohibition. And so all of a sudden you walk around filled with imagined fears and anxieties associated with secret pleasures that you yourself are not even aware of because they're down so deep inside of you. Now, the most disturbing thing in society to me is this consumo materialism. And thinking about it in terms of neuroticism, it makes so much sense. All of the sickness of our systems, I believe, is a compensation pattern for the true desires within us that we're not allowing ourselves to have. All of the shit we can buy, all of the whatever, it's all just a pacifier for probably something so much wilder, wetter, and weirder lurking within our unconscious that we're not even allowing ourselves to touch. When it comes to consumer materialism and all of the sort of global imperialistic ism institutions we have going on, it seems to me like there are two possibilities. Either someone is in charge and orchestrating all this shit, and it's some like whacked out Illuminati reality, or no one is in charge And it's all just billions of people neurotically whacked out and so far away from our own desires that we just keep digging and digging deeper and deeper into the resources of our planet, looking for more and more pacifiers when really a pacifier is just never going to do it for us. If number 2 is the case, which personally I prefer, then the only thing we can do to get out of this mess is to return once again to our true desires. And I've been super into this dude named Charles Fourier, who I found out through this awesome other dude named Connor Habib, who has a dope series on Reality Sandwich on radical sexual thinkers, who I highly suggest checking out. Charles Fourier, or however you say his name, was all about education and the liberation of human passion. And he believed that we would reach a more utopian society by following pleasures. If we just kept doing what's pleasurable, we would just get more things that were pleasurable. And pleasure would lead to pleasure, would lead to pleasure, and pretty soon, the whole earth would be Pleasure Town. If you think we're all rapists and murderers, the idea of us following our pleasures is terrifying. It's super scary. But I think it would be more like we would be a whole planet of toddlers. You know, toddlers do kill things, and they do sometimes want attention from other toddlers and violate boundaries. But there's also tons of sweetness there. There's also tons of finger painting and humping the chair going on. It seems like it only gets all Lord of the Flies and shit when people start making structures and ideologies that take people away from themselves, that create systems, that abstract individuals from being able to feel that direct moment of felt experience. Imposing moralities is part of what makes us have immoral impulses. So what if instead we created a system about education and the liberation of human passion? It was about exploring and allowing feelings, where it was about listening to instincts and intuitions. We might be really surprised about what we find. We might be really surprised about what this human creature ends up being. And maybe in toddlers and adults, this would bring us to a sense of internal guidance that would lead to a morality that truly reflected our humanness, that truly instructed us on how to navigate the human experience, and that would maybe give way to a society that was more beautiful, more joyous, more pleasurable, more just, and maybe even more moral. Egret, 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 egret. Derp, 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 derp. Egret, egret, egret. Yeah, that's definitely a blue heron.